second webinar series of the Philosophical Association of the Philippines with the theme of gender education and the pandemic. I would like to inform everyone that this session is going to be recorded and it's going to be posted on the PAP Facebook page. So if you refuse to be part of the recording, kindly please just inform us so we can take out your names in the recording if ever. Okay? So I am Hazel Biana and I'm one of the active members, board members of the PAP. So obviously, I'll be opening the program for today. So before we begin, I just like to welcome everyone and say thank you, to everyone for making time for this event. And of course, thank you to our dear treasurer, Dr. Gina Opiniano, for organizing this event. And of course, to our dear speakers and reactors, I will be introducing later on. So to begin the session, just to give you an idea how the program is going to be, so we'll have our first two speakers followed by our reactor, after which the open forum will begin shortly. So kindly please save your questions for the open forum program portion of our program. So allow me to introduce our speakers and reactors. Our first speaker is Jonathan Galima Florendo, who has been an educator for 20 years. So living his philosophy of lifelong learning, Jonathan is a graduate of AB and MA in philosophy at St. Louis University, Baguio City, where he has been teaching for 18 years. So he pursued his PhD in philosophy as a CHED 212 scholar at DLSU, or De La Salle University, Manila, in ardent pursuit of his advocacy for transformative
So
education
number
from the
three
grassroots.
is
He founded and
TV-based
currently chairs
instructions or
of the
radio-based
Institute of
instructions
Leadership.
refers to the use of television or radio programs on channels.
So to continue on, so Jonathan currently chairs the Institute of Leaders in Educational Advancement and Development, or ILEAD, where he creates opportunities and venues for like-minded educators to contribute to genuine educational reform from the bottom up. Having been raised in a poor agricultural community in Ilocos Sur, Jonathan has dedicated his time outside of his teaching duties to the development of his community by creating livelihood, initiating political education, introducing agricultural reform, and strengthening traditions, culture, and identity of his Ilocano roots. Raised by farmer parents and first in a brood of 5, Jonathan is no stranger to the challenges of class. So his advocacy likewise extends to the development of sports as a venue for engendering values of cooperation, competition, and fair play among the youth of his community. So his experiences, personal and vicarious, of the effects of ethnic, gender, and class struggles in rural communities has led him on a crusade to enlighten and empower the disenfranchised through his teaching and writings. He envisions himself as a scholar for the people. Dr. Eva Kaluwing, our second speaker, graduated from the University of the Philippines with a doctorate degree in history and philosophy of education. She finished her MA degree in philosophy of education and bachelor's degree in philosophy from the same university, where she served as the first female punong babaylan of UP Babaylan. She served in the executive committee of Task Force Pride from 2003 to 2007. She's a board member of the Babaylanes Incorporated, the founding chair of the Rainbow Catholics Philippines, and the Asia Pacific representative in the global network of Rainbow Catholics, or the GNRC board. She is the chair of the Department of Professional Education and the concurrent OIC of the College of Education of the University of the East. Our reactor is Dr. Roel Madula. He is an associate professor of De La Salle University, Manila. He teaches Philippine studies with specialization on language, arts and culture, and mass media. He studied legal management at the Ateneo de Manila University and MA and PhD in Philippine Studies at the De La Salle University, Manila. He has co-authored 2 books and is currently the co-editor of Malay, an international journal on Philippine studies. So thank you very much to our 2 speakers and to our reactor for agreeing to be a part of this endeavor. So to begin, let us start with Mr. Jonathan Florendo on his talk, which is entitled Oppression and Philippine OB. Jonathan?
Hello, good morning. Hello, Doc. Doc Hazel, naririnig ba ako?
Yes, we can hear you. Please
Okay.
proceed.
Yeah, good morning everyone. Okay, so please pakikuan lang po yung slides ko po. Ma'am, hindi ko po ma-access ngayon sa akin.
Yes po,
Yung
nakalabas na po.
Okay, ma'am. So sa second slide po tayo, ma'am. OBE is considered an innovative educational paradigm that initially gained ground during the post-World War period. It surged in popularity during the 60s, but retreated in the face of European criticism in the 70s. By the turn of the 21st century, however, William Spady led a resurgence that resulted in OBE expanding through Australia and South Africa, and by the 2010s, it caught the attention of Philippine educational leaders, at least in the public sector. By 2012, it was institutionalized in the country as the official doctrine of Philippine higher education. Not long after, a series of criticisms was leveled at OBE, even as it was cascaded through Philippine public and private HEIs through seminars and forums. Next slide po. One of the reasons for OBE's implementation in the Philippine education is because of the country's failure to bring Filipino graduates to the level required for global integration and competition. Key educational figures argue that OBE is the key to reforming the tertiary level of education and solving this problem. OBE then intends to produce quality graduates required by the global economic order. OBE was formally institutionalized through CHED Memorandum Order Number 46, Series of 2012. Next slide po. This rationale for OBE's implementation, with this rationale for OBE's implementation, we can deduce that OBE is a brainchild of capitalism. It is a framework implemented in the educational sector primarily to develop skills that are necessary in propelling the capitalist economy and to further strengthen its influence over people. Reading Philippine OBE literatures enables us to realize the truth of this claim. Some documents show that the Philippine... Some documents show that the Philippine OBE's idea of excellence and quality is lifted from Harvey, who in a later work traces its origins the concepts of quality and quality assurance to ISO 9000. ISO 9000 is a set of quality management systems that sets out standards for organizations to ensure that customers' needs with regard to a product or service are satisfied within international legal frameworks. It originated as a British standard, that is BS 5750, which was first published in 1979 and given sanction by the International Standards Office in 1987 as ISO 9000. ISO 9000 was first applied to education and training in 1991 by the British Standards Institute. When it did so, such application meant that the managerial standards for manufacturing firms were adopted for universities and colleges. School administrators became production managers, and students became customers whose satisfaction became the main goal of the total quality management. The university has become a corporation. No wonder educational administrators of the Philippine HEIs have turned more and more toward a managerial mindset. They have started to develop a kind of educational management that is in tune with a business corporation's conception, the sale of quality education that satisfies the consumer. The goal of fostering culture and national values thus becomes devalued, and the university began to pursue and adhere more to the ideology of consumerism. It has become bound to the rules and principles of global capitalism. In order to fulfill the demand of the global economy in education, the CMO spells out the importance of the pursuit of quality. This quality is assured through evaluation and monitoring tools in educational management. The competencies to be achieved in producing graduates are nothing more than competencies that are required by the global capitalist market. Next slide po. In Philippine OBE, desired outcomes are set by the HEIs based on their mission, vision, and goals as educational institutions. However, CHED decides on the general curriculum content of every program and course offered in HEIs. Moreover, with the CMO, CHED stipulates a standardized QA framework, rationalizing the imposition of a horizontal typology of HEIs, modifying the existing one-size-fits-all QA for HEIs, and prescribing a differential QA based on its created horizontal typology, and adopting a competency-based learning standards and outcome-based QA monitoring and evaluation system. This means that in the implementation of the CHED memorandum, known as the Philippine OBE, CHED, in its aim to comply with the global economic demand, has extended its control over the determination of HEI systems and operations, and effectively undermined their freedom to determine for themselves, number one, who may teach, number two, what may be taught, number three, how lessons shall be taught, and number four, who may be admitted to study. At the level of the classroom, the level of domination and control would be multiplied. Not only is the teacher bound by the requirements of the structured system of learning imposed by government, the student is likewise bound by it. The CHED memorandum, therefore, makes it doubly difficult to create a condition of learning that is democratic and free. It not only binds teacher and student to the competencies and outcomes that have been determined by the government regulatory institution. It also binds them to programs that have been decided as aligned with the goals and aims it sets. It binds both of them to teaching methodologies deemed appropriate for the attainment of such outcomes and competencies. And it binds both of them to a given set of tools to measure the extent of their adherence to these elements of the system. Hence, CHED's OBE is a system that entraps HEIs to fulfill a predetermined set of goals and forces them to adopt preset multiple missions. Consequently, teachers and students end up imprisoned within a system designed to achieve state-determined outcomes meant to fulfill the above missions of HEIs. Next slide po. Bell Hook's educational philosophy defines education as a process of liberation and deplores the current educational system as the systematic reinscription of colonialism and dominance. Following Freire, she critiques the banking system of education perpetuated by professors who were actively hostile to the notion of student participation. The OBE is essentially the same as the banking system, which both Freire and Hooks criticize. Both are authoritative in nature. Both possess the attitude of imposing the type of knowledge and behavior which students should acquire. Though OBE proclaims that it is a student-centered system, students' participation is only limited to participation in class activities to arrive at the outcomes which were already set for them prior to the learning activity. The picture Hooks paints of the educational system is one of authoritarianism, where the very experience of learning is subject to absolute control. True learning only occurs when authentic participation transpires inside the classroom. Learners as well as teachers truly participate when there is freedom. Freedom for hooks means the elimination of the inured and self-perpetuating structures that stifle both the teachers and the students' voices in the classroom. Such freedom rejoices in a multiculturalism that is not mere tokenism, but one that recognizes the equal participation and involvement of all groups in the learning process. So, is OBE really student-centered, where students participate in learning activities which leads them to self-actualization? Or do they participate in learning activities for them to be molded according to what has been predesigned for them? Next slide po. Hooks believes that authentic participation is necessary in development of critical thinking, which is the ultimate goal of education among students. This can be achieved only when individual voices are heard in the classroom, where learners are free to evaluate and critique social processes, and through this, understand and realize oppressive systems playing within these processes from their own perspective. This means that a true liberative and emancipatory education is primarily geared towards the acceptance of as well as the revelation of these differences in the classroom and how these differences in condition play out in the teaching and learning process. This grants them critical consciousness and enables them to see the covert, conservative political underpinnings shaping the content of material in the classroom, as well as the way in which ideologies of domination inform the ways thinkers teach and act in the classroom. Also, through this self-actualization is achieved. For Hooks, a democratic classroom is where teachers are excited to teach and where students are excited to learn. Teachers are excited to teach because they are not limited by standardized methodologies and content. They are free to roam various pedagogical thoroughfares to whatever strange outcomes this may lead. Students are also excited to learn because they are not limited to being mere spectators of the tightly controlled drama that unfolds in the classroom, but are active participants in an experience in whose unfolding they are involved with from the beginning. A democratic classroom is where meaningful and authentic learning occurs. Next slide po. The authoritarian nature of OBE takes the fun out of learning and makes its use. Hence, denies learners as well as teachers of the opportunity to truly participate in the entire learning process. The seriousness of learning in authoritarian settings, Hooks says, makes education oppressive since it takes away joy and happiness, developing in them the resentment for education and each other because they are barred from an active relationship with knowledge derived from an experience with the world, a knowledge that opens the eyes of the learners to the possibility of transforming that very same world. The fact that predetermined outcomes have been laid out before the actual learning experience makes OBE insensitive to the actual life realities of students as well as teachers. OBE imposes similar outcomes to students with varying circumstances, conditions, and experiences in life. Next slide po. Curiously, it seems to me very interesting to analyze the words of the CMO. In the way it is formulated and articulated, critical thinking does not appear to be a valued characteristic of these graduates which the OBE system intends to produce. In the CMO, observe how the words academic, thinking, behavioral, and technical are used as adjectives to describe the skills or competencies to be acquired in higher education. The CMO takes pains to separate the critical as a quality of thought. The lack of critical thinking is not the basis for pushing for quality education and quality assurance. Critical thinking is not the reason why the country is not performing well economically. It is because, according to research, of the lack of a critical pool of graduates with the necessary thinking, technical, and behavioral competencies. Despite this, advocates of the OBE system attempt to rationalize the constructive grounds of outcome-based education by claiming that in its later stages, when the learners exit the system, OBE becomes transformative. However, a careful reading of the principles of OBE belies the fact that they are not the grounds of OBE. The kind of professional conduct, the definitions and measures of excellence, and the philosophy of education come out as the effects of the outcomes that have been preset for a particular discipline. The practice of OBE will enable teachers and learners to develop certain behavioral characteristics and a frame of mind specifically molded by OBE. It is in this sense that OBE becomes restrictive and illiberal. At the exit, teachers and learners imbibe a culture that is predefined according to the type of conduct needed to produce the competencies that have already been preset. Next slide po. The promise of transformation leading to self-actualization in OBE is not the usual self-actualization that we know in philosophy to mean self-determination, that is determining our life's direction, the philosophical view and disposition of which we view reality, values, etc. In OBE, self-actualization is the transformation of individuals according to the needs of the national or global economy, steered by the capitalist system. At the exit, teachers imbibe a culture of professionalism that is predefined according to the type of conduct needed to produce the competencies that have been preset. Learners, on the other hand, are transformed and enabled to achieve the competencies that have been determined as fit for them. Neither the teachers nor the learners have had or will ever have the freedom to choose who and what they would become in a world that they would construct had they been in command of their own education. Next slide po. The oppressive character of OBE, therefore, stems from its propensity to dissolve individual differences, taking away the significance of individual experiences of learners as well as teachers in the learning process, and to impose on them the values and consciousness desired by the neoliberalist ideology. In short, it takes away freedom, which is necessary if education is truly sincere in its duty to emancipate learners, teachers, and the community as a whole. Next slide po. In the practice of OBE, the language of quality and excellence is used to silence transgressive voices from the ranks of the students and some of the faculty. Students, for example, who will not be able to afford tuition fee increases are advised to find the means to stay on since they are in a quality school. Education is a commodity whose price increases with increasing quality and excellence. Of course, quality and excellence are measured not in terms of the depth of thought and the degree of critical thinking displayed by the students and teachers, but by the degree of their adherence to preset outcomes and indicators stated in institutional directives and standards. The language of quality and excellence, therefore, disguises the reality of class in the university as students from lower socioeconomic levels are steered toward thinking of themselves as privileged, regardless of the greater difficulty their parents find themselves in. For the faculty, the language of OBE has become the norm for a good course content and methodology, and those who learn and use this language became the models of quality and excellent teaching. It is therefore an advantage for a teacher to have attended an OBE seminar, more so when that seminar is a follow-up to a basics OBE 1. The more OBE seminars one has attended, the higher became his status. The more peppered his vocabulary also was with the words of such as outcomes, quality assurance, standardized evaluation techniques and tools, excellence, competencies, and others. This set the ground for promotion to department headships or area level supervisory positions. The language of OBE thus became the basis for the distribution of merit and remuneration. It also became a ground for intellectual inequality as teachers who are unable to use OBE lingo, either because they are never able to attend seminars or steadfastly refuse to use standardized outcomes in the referential taxonomy, are regarded as inept or below the norm. So we use displayed an understanding of instead of comprehended, to draw schematic diagram of concepts instead of to negotiate the relationships between the concepts, and to construct a diorama of instead of engage in a critical discourse of. Action words are measurable. Critical concepts were not. OBE has cloven praxis from theory and made the former superior to the other. OBE has cloven praxis from theory and made the former superior to the other. Teachers and students who bring the two together as a dialectical tool for critical social reflection and change were now subordinated to those who extracted only the tangible, measurable manifestations of learning concepts. Let me end my talk with these words. So next slide po. Education is supposed to free minds. Free thought re-envisions society as one that is more just and human. To teach is to foment transgression. It labors to build communities of hope. Critical thinking enables the individual to recognize systems of oppression wherever they exist, whether in political, social, economic, gender, and ethnic or racial structures. When voices of transgression are muted by the very same educational system that is supposed to liberate minds and realize the full potential of such minds to recreate social and political structures, the educational system itself becomes a tool for the perpetuation of the existing illiberal society. Thank you. That ends my talk po. Thank you po. Hello?
Labang palakpak dyan. Okay. Magandang buhay sa ating lahat. Salamat sa pag-unmute. Mahirap pala talaga yun kapag ikaw ay oppressed, no? Kaya hindi ka nagkakaroon ng pagkakataon na makapagsalita. Kagaya ng sinabi ni Sir Florendo, naranasan natin for a few moments. Parang, ay, ang hirap doon. Gusto kong magsabihin pero wala kang masabi para doon para magawa mo yung gusto mong gawin. Anyway, magandang buhay sa ating lahat. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank PAP, the Philosophical Association of the Philippines, Incorporated, for including gender, particularly LGBTQ inclusive education in this particular event. Thank you for that. Okay, so let me discuss how am I going to relate LGBTQ inclusive education in the context of a pandemic. Let me continue. Kanina binanggit yung mga outcomes, no? Dahil tayo ay outcomes-based education in the tertiary level. So at the end of this particular presentation, we are hoping that we are able to increase cultural sensitivity. Next, offer support for LGBTQ students and teachers to counter some issues exacerbated by this pandemic. And the last one is to engage in meaningful discussions that concern the community. So hopefully we are going to achieve these outcomes at the end of this particular event. Okay, let's look at our assumption. Ano yung mga ating mga akala, no? By the way, nakalimutan kong batiin kayo, maligayang buwan ng wika sa mga kaguruan na nandito. Siguro wala pa tayo sa FB Live, no? Pero kapag napanood to ng ibang mga kaguruan, maligayang buwan ng wika, maligayang buwan ng kasaysayan ngayong buwan ng Agosto. Balikan ko, ano ba yung ating mga akala? Kanina sa titulo, no, LGBTQ yung ginamit ko. Dito naman, ang ginagamit ko ay SOGI inclusive and a SOGI inclusive educational framework that is clear will remove the ambiguity and vagueness of terms relevant to LGBT experiences and issues. I'm sure some of you or most of you are familiar with the term LGBTQ as well as with the abbreviation of SOGI, no? It stands for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expressions. So yun yung ating assumption dito. Kapag yung ating educational framework ay SOGI inclusive, babaguhin niya o tatanggalin niya kung ano man yung mga hindi pagkakaunawaan sa usapin ng linguistika, no? Meron ako iyan ng isang event, ibang-iba talaga yung yung definition nilang ginagamit sa ano yung sexual orientation, gender identity. Parang ako, sa isang educational institution, ganyan ang definition, medyo nakakatakot yun kasi binabago mo yung ibig sabihin o yung definition ng sexual orientation at gender identity ayon sa paniniwala mo at hindi sa kung ano yung dapat na pinapalaganap mo bilang isang educational institution. Okay. So our claim is that philosophical frameworks in education include a wide array of issues revolving around fundamental beliefs and principles in which they are based upon. This means to say, if you are teaching in a sectarian school, yung philosophical framework mo, kung saan nakabase yung paraan ng pagtuturo mo o ng paraan ng edukasyon, ay religious institution, doon yung kanyang philosophical framework. Nakakatakot iyon kapag nagpapalaganap siya ng mga konsepto na halimbawa, nabanggit kanina, no, kapag ito ay discriminating or oppressive sa isang sektor ng ating lipunan. Ganun din, sa kabaliktaran, kapag naman progresibo o gumagamit ka ng mga progressive educational frameworks, inaral natin yan nung tayo ay, lalo na yung mga nagnais maging guro, nagkumuha ng mga foundations of education, lahat ng mga isms, whether it's progressivism or traditionalism, nauunawaan natin na yung philosophical framework na pinagbabasehan o pinag-aangklahan ng kanilang eskwelahan ay yun yung papalaganaping ideya o mga konsepto. Sige. Bago tayo magpatuloy, let's do a back step. Palagi ko itong ginagawa sa mga presentations ko. No? At gusto ko kasi i-connect yung LGBT inclusive education doon sa kasalukuyang nararanasan natin yung pandemya. Let's do a back step. LGBTQs, okay? Para sa mga bago lang narinig yung LGBTQs, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer people experience discrimination and injustices every day, even before the pandemic. Yun yung pagtingin natin sa sa paglingon sa nakaraan. Ngayon naman, ano yung sitwasyon natin ngayon? Sabi natin si COVID-19, mas lalo niya pinaggrabe yung sitwasyon ng mga LGBTQs. Mamaya, babanggitin ko, paano pinagrabe o sa konteksto ng pandemya, paano pinagrabe o pinalala yung sitwasyon ng mga LGBTQs sa sektor halimbawa ng magkaroon ka ng access doon sa mga pangunahing serbisyo ng gobyerno, ng pamahalaan, pagkakaroon ng prejudice environment, at ganoon din yung mga kawalan. Sige, at dahil gusto ko kayong i-engage, teacher education, no? Magkakaroon tayo ng activity. Sige, gagamitin natin yung chat box. Lahat ng mga nasa Zoom po ngayon, okay, so magpa-participate, hindi lang tayo makikinig. Isulat ninyo kung anong kulay ang kumakatawan sa inyo ngayon. Kahit na anong kulay. Sa tingin nyo, ako ngayon ay dilaw, ako ay orange, ako ay blue. So pakisulat nga sa ating chat box. Everyone, please, those who are in Zoom right now. Blue, orange. Gusto ko yung mahogany. Parang wala naman yung mahogany dito. Gray. Okay, yung background, no? Why not? No? Think outside the box. Hindi lang naman yung kulay na nakikita natin. Red, okay? Ako ngayon ay pink. Sabi niya, red. Yung original na rainbow flag, meron talaga siyang kulay pink. Pink, tapos Roy-G-Biv. Okay? Purple or violet, yellow. Yung iba, siguro iniisip pa nila kung anong kulay sila. So yun yung kumakatawan siguro sa nararamdaman ninyo ngayon. No? So tingnan natin kung ano yung mga karaniwang perception, what are the common interpretations of the following colors. No? Thank you sa lahat ng mga sumagot. Salamat sa inyong partisipasyon. Para tayong nasa klase, kung tayo ay guro at nakita natin hindi nagpa-participate yung bata natin, bakit kaya siya hindi nagpa-participate? Next, sabi natin, no, kapag red yung pinili ninyo, maaaring kayo ay feeling passionate, feeling eager, or feeling active. Gusto kong matuto ngayon kasi kapag natuto ko, meron akong ibabahagi sa iba. Orange, masaya, happy, fun, jolly, kaya nga siguro yun yung kulay nung nung tutube na sikat. Yellow, bright, feeling positive, feeling light, source of light. May we be the source of light to others. Green is nurturing, caring, and I'm feeling healthy. Okay. May paliwanag pa yung ating isang participant, no? Blue because it is the color of the sky and sea. It is often associated with depth and stability. Blue is calm, peaceful, and serene. And violet is probably you're feeling connected, relaxed, and feeling committed. Again, thank you for those who participated. Now, you know your feelings, of course. Ikaw lang naman makaka-alam nung pakiramdam mo na yan. Magandang tanongin rin natin, ano naman kaya ang nararamdaman ng mga LGBTQ students and teachers? What do you think are they feeling during this pandemic? Kung tayo ay hindi kabahagi ng LGBT community, baka magandang pagnilayan o magkaroon tayo ng perspektibo kung saan, ano naman kaya yung nararamdaman nila? Parehas lang ba sa nararamdaman ko? Mas magaan ba yung nararamdaman nila? O mas mahirap? Okay? Sige. Our claim is that experiences of discrimination and injustices by the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, LGBTQ Filipino people are worthy of documentation. You know, when I was doing my thesis and dissertation back in the day, kaunting-kaunti talaga yung mga literatura, mga nasusulat tungkol sa pagiging Filipino LGBTQ. Madalas, yung mga resources na ginagamit ng mga mananaliksik ay palaging konteksto ng West. Okay? Siguro, dahil nga malaki ang kinalaman ng ating lipunan kung saan hindi naman talaga pinapansin o kung gamitin natin yung invisibility na salita, hindi talaga pinapansin yung mga isyong nararanasan ng mga LGBTQ people. Kasi ang tingin, lilipas din yan, stage lang yan, yung mga gano'n. Ito ay pinalala ng hindi pagkakaroon o walang puwang sa sektor ng edukasyon para pag-usapan itong issue na ito. Yeah. So, and you might would like to ask, why are we feeling this way? Why are we being treated this way? Ano yung naging sanhi noong ganoong trato sa mga LGBTQ people, particularly students and teachers? Kasi tayo ay nasa sektor ng edukasyon, no? What causes these feelings? Okay. Kung pakiramdam at pakiramdam rin lang, saan nanggaling? What is the nature and source of the treatment being given by people towards LGBTQ people or members of the LGBTQ community? So, definition of terms muna tayo para malinaw kasi we have to be very clear with regard to the use of terms, no? Yung linguistic language clarification. So, we say discrimination means to imply any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference which is based on any ground such as sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, whether actual or perceived, and which has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by all persons on equal footing of all rights and freedoms. This is the definition of UN in 2003. Yun daw yung discrimination. Now, when we were lobbying for SOGI equality, kasi ang pagkakaalaman natin ngayon, SOGI equality bill, but in the past, ang tawag yan ay anti-discrimination bill. Kami sa Senate, sabi ng isang senador, wala naman kayo nararasang discrimination na. Okay naman na kayo . So, magandang basagin yung saan nanggaling yung pag-iisip na walang discrimination o wala namang nararanasang discrimination. Hindi ibig sabihin may nakikita kang panakanakang mga miyembro ng community na sikat at mayaman, hindi ibig sabihin doon hindi nararanasan ng iba sa komunidad kung anumang distinction, not distinction, restriction, anumang mga exclusion o anumang mga preference na naranasan base sa anumang kategorya ka napapabilang. Okay. So, bilisan ko lang to kasi ang aking assumption ay naiintindihan na natin to, yung sexual orientation. So, meron kang bisexuality, meron kang homosexuality, at meron kang heterosexuality. Doon naman sa may gender identity, ito naman yung magkaiba kasi yung yung paggamit ng sexual, iba yung sexual orientation sa gender identity. Dahil nga wala nang formal na pag-introduce doon sa curriculum itong mga konsepto na ito. So iba-iba yung definition. Kung iba-iba yung definition, iba-iba yung pagkaunawa, so iba-iba rin yung yung position mo. Kasi yung man yung pagkakaunawa mo, yun ang magsasabi kung ano magiging decision mo at action mo sa issue. Okay. Ito yung these are the two definitions that I would like to highlight. The concept of heteronormativity and homonegativity. Ano yung heteronormativity? So, it is a viewpoint that heterosexuality is of superior type compared to other sexualities. So, meron kang iba't ibang sexual orientation, meron kang bisexuality, meron kang homosexuality. Pag heteronormative ka, ang tingin mo, yung ang ginagamit kasing term ay straight, although I wouldn't use straight, kasi pag sinabi mong straight, ibig sabihin ba yung iba ay crooked or curve? Kaya mahalaga yung paggamit ng mga terminolohiya kasi doon pa lang sa paggamit mo ng straight, meron siyang implikasyon, meron siyang konotasyon sa sa gagamitin mo sa opposite na end, no? Opposite other end. Yung homonegativity naman, this is the negative attitude towards homosexuality or LGBT people. I think sa buhay natin may nakilala na tayo ng mga tao na talagang nega talaga sila. Hindi talaga gusto yung mga LGBT people. At magandang tingnan, saan ba nanggaling yung ganoong negative attitude towards LGBT people? Yun ba yung dahil pag naalagaan mo yung baby, tapos ayaw tumahan sa pag-iiyak? Sige ka, ibibigay kita sa ibibigay kita doon sa, kasi nangyari yun sa mga, sa mga kapatid ko, ibibigay ka doon sa may baklang kapitbahay namin. So natakot siya kasi hindi ko alam kung bakit tiyatakot o ginagamit na panakot yung bakla naming kapitbahay. Okay, so naglikha definitely yung ganoong pag-iisip. Kung bakit ka negative o negatibo yung pagtingin mo sa mga homosexuals. Siyempre, mas ginagamit natin yung homophobia more than homo-negative. Alright. So, anong issue? Ba't natin kailangang pag-usapan ito? Concepts revolving around LGBT education, such as the difference between and among the concepts of SOGI, as well as gender expression, are not yet included in any legal document which could lead us to different understanding of truths about sexual identities. So yun yung sinasabi natin. Dahil wala kang pag-introduce noon sa mga konsepto na to, iba-iba yung pagkakaunawa mo. At dahil ulitin ko, dahil iba ang pagkakaunawa mo, yun yung decision mo, yung pag-uugali mo, o yung relasyon mo na meron sa kanila ay nakabase kung paano ka na-introduce doon sa konsepto. Okay. Various problems confronting the education sector require us to provide, dito papasok yung filosofiya, no? Analytic understanding of the issue by way of studying how these terms, if they are used by educators in the actual activity of teaching and figure out whether the conception is clear or not. That's by Orteza in 2001. Okay, let's continue. Now, the question is here. The question lies on the place of LGBTQ education in the Philippine educational system. How an inclusive education relates to teaching and learning, as well as other philosophic discourse that may arise from the exhibition of such framework. Maraming mga eskwelahan gagamit sila ng salitang inclusive o inclusive education, pero gaano ba natin nauunawaan yung ibig sabihin ng pagiging inclusive yung ating education? Baka naman ang inclusivity mo lang ay doon ka sa basta kami inclusive kami with regard to persons with disabilities o special needs education. The rest, hindi namin concern yan. Indigenous peoples, yung mga vulnerable and marginalized sectors. At syempre, yung highlight natin dito, yung LGBTQ community. Tingnan natin yung commitment ng Department of Education kasi hindi naman pwedeng sabihin natin na meron tayong analysis pero hindi natin titingnan yung mismong institusyon na nagpapalaganap ng gandong konsepto. No? Sabi niya ng DepEd, yung kanyang commitment, the commitment of DepEd is to produce graduates that are makabayan or patriotic, makatao, mindful of humanity, makakalikasan, respectful of nature, and makadiyos. This commitment is faithful to the national motto of the country prescribed, or as prescribed, in RA 8491 or the Flag and Heraldic Code of the Philippines in 1998. So ang linaw, no, ito yung mga gusto nating maging mga graduates. Ngayon, ang susunod, i-define natin, no, ano ang definition ng makabayan, ano ang definition ng makatao, ano ang definition ng makakalikasan, at ng makadiyos. Para kung ano man yung framework, educational framework ka, ay faithful doon sa commitment na sinasabi ng Department of Education. Okay, let's continue. Okay, let's look at DepEd vision and mission. When we try to analyze the frameworks, the philosophical frameworks of of philosophical frameworks in education, we should look at the vision, mission, goals, philosophy, hindi lamang ng DepEd, maging yung CHED o yung trifocal education, paano naman sa TESDA? Ano yung sinasabi nila? So hindi ko nababasahin kasi alam naman natin to, nakikita naman to natin palagi, pero gusto kong i-highlight o ipakita yung in-highlight ko dito. No? Sabi ng mission, to protect and promote the right of every Filipino to quality, equitable, culture-based, and complete basic education where students learn in a child-friendly, gender-sensitive, safe, and motivating environment. So pag sinabi mong gender-sensitive, ano ba yung ibig sabihin mo dyan? Ito ba ay pagiging sensitibo sa gender sa usapin ng babae at lalaki? Paano yung LGBTQ? Paano yung ibang sexualities? Nakapaloob ba doon? Okay. Now let's look at ano yung uri ng kapaligiran, the kind of environment that we have right now. And I'll try my best to connect it with the pandemic. So workplace, work arrangement. So let's look at it. So workplace and work arrangement, maaaring yung pandemya ay nakatulong lalong higit kung yung workplace or work arrangement, yung workplace na meron ka ay very discriminating to LGBTQ people. Just imagine if you're a teacher or you are a student and you have colleagues, you have classmates who are bullying you. So dahil may pandemya, maaaring nakabuti sa kanilang perspektibo, no, sa sitwasyon ng workplace, dahil hindi mo sila makikita, hindi ka nila masaktan, walang physical assault, hindi ka nila matutokso, walang tuksuhan, walang chismis, walang insulto, walang pagbabanta, walang kasinungalingan, walang name calling, o ikaw, ano ka, tomboy ka, o ikaw, ano ka, bakla ka, bading na yan, oh. Walang harassment, walang mga masakit na mga pananalita. Ulitin ko, hindi lamang sa classroom, maaaring mag-apply nito sa kung ano mang workplace na meron tayo. So yung work arrangement na work from home ngayon ay maaaring okay. Now, kung ang usapin kasi dito, di ba sinasabi natin, yung bahay ay supposedly yung ano mo, no, yung sacred place mo. Pero paano pa sa pangalawang bullet, no? Paano ko sa mismong bahay doon nagmumula itong mga to? Merong name calling, merong mga insulto, pananakit mula sa kapatid o kamag-anak, magulang. So parang homophobic yung yung setting mo kasi yung magulang mo ay hindi ka tinatanggap. So ang talagang inaasahan mo, sana may pasok na lang para nakakasama ko yung mga classmates ko. Sana may pasok na lang para makikita ko yung support system ko sa workplace. So ganun yung epekto. Nabanggit ko na yung classroom kanina, puntahan naman natin yung another social institution kasi yung workplace ay economics, family is home, classroom is education, na natin yung place of worship, ang religion. So, maaaring ikaw mismo na nakakaranas ng diskriminasyon, gusto mo na sana makapunta ako sa simbahan, makapunta ako sa bahay dasalan, kasi doon lang ako humuhugot ng pag-asa. Doon lang ako nagkakaroon ng pagkakataon na magkaroon ng komunyon sa aking Diyos na alam ko yung Diyos ko ay hindi sumisino. Pero paano kung yung mismong relihiyon mo ay yung ang turo sa iyo ay mali ka? Okay? Ngayon, sa mga tao naman na ang hinuhugutan nila ng Diyos at wala ay yung bahay dasalan at wala silang access ngayon, panahon ng pandemya, at toxic yung kanyang home environment, ano kaya yung kanyang naranasan? Magandang tingnan natin. Next, kung pamilyar kayo, no, itong screenshot ko ay statement mo mula sa Assumption Iloilo kung saan, ewan ko kung pamilyar yung ibang mga teachers dito at ating mga tagapakinig, kung saan sinabi na yung homosexuality ay immoral at magiging ground para ikaw ay ma-expel, no? Yun yung sinasabi. So naglabas sila, kasi kasama doon sa kanilang student handbook for employees and for students. So syempre, ang komunidad ay magkakaroon ng malaking reaksyon. Nasaan tayo? Nasaan panahon na tayo? Akala natin unti-unting nagbabago yung ating lipunan. Pero pinandigan ng Assumption Iloilo yung kanilang definition sa pagsasabi na ito ay, dito papasok yung philosophical framework. Ito ay faithful doon sa turo ng Catechism of the Catholic Church o yung CCC na tinatawag. So sinasabi nila, yung kanilang desisyon ay nakaayon at pinoprotektahan ng konstitusyon ng bansa. Okay? Now, sa kabaliktaran naman, naglabas ng pahayag yung Assumption College dito sa San Lorenzo sa Makati, gayon din yung mismong high school batch 2018 ng Assumption Iloilo. Kasi ang kanilang paniniwala, hindi ito congruent o hindi ito faithful doon sa tinuturo ng patron, ng Diyos, kung saan sila dapat ay nilikha bilang, ito basahin ko, no? Which develops not only, and I quote, which develops not only skills, but also character for life and life for God. So, isa siyang malaking issue nitong Agosto, kung saan yung paglabas ng gantong pahayag o yung handbook ng Assumption Iloilo ay malinaw na forma ng diskriminasyon laban sa mga bata o mga empleyado na LGBTQ. Kaya nga magandang maunawaan, bakit? Yung sinabing, mali ka agad, pero bakit may ganyan tayong paniniwala? Dahil ito ang turo, at kaya na silang tanggalin sa eskwelahan? Nasaan yung karapatan na matuto? Yung mga ganoong mga diskusyon, na mahabang diskusyon po ito. Okay. So kung ganoon ang ating mga eskwelahan, hindi lang naman yan nangyayari sa eskwelahan na yun. Marami pa pong mga eskwelahan nagaganap iyan, maging sa mga pampublikong paaralan. Okay. So yan yung mga takot na. Fear of coming out. Fear of showing your true self. Because the environment is either biphobic, homophobic, or transphobic. Hindi ako magpapakita ng aking ng kung sino talaga ako. And palagi ko itong sinasabi sa mga estudyante ko, nothing beats being your true self. Kung iisa lang yung buhay natin, susundan natin na sabi ni Aristotle, you are unrepeatable. Paano ka ba nabuhay sa mundo? Nabuhay ka ba sa takot? Dahil nga, ganoon yung iyong kapaligiran. Baka maganda na maging bahagi ka sa advokasya kung saan yung kapaligiran ay hinahayaan mo. Pag-isipan natin, bakit ba natin ayaw o bakit natin tinututulan yung homosexuality or yung pagiging LGBTQ. Sabi ni Elsa, conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. So, palagi sa buhay mo, hindi ka itatago mo na na kung sino ka, kasi nga ayaw mo malaman nila, ayaw mo tuksuhin ka. Yung buhay na yun nakakalungkot at nakakatakot, pero produkto yun kung paano tinitingnan ng lipunan yung LGBTQ nga. School context. Itong pag-aaral ay noong 2011 pa, pero mamaya bibigay ko kayo ng update. No? Sabi ng pag-aaral ng UN, students around the world are routinely denied the basic universal human right to education because of discrimination and violence they experience in school on the basis of actual or perceived soji. Meron akong isang kaibigan na hindi talaga siya lesbian, pero di ba yung stereotyping nga, ang akala lesbian siya. So yung naranasan ng mga na diskriminasyon ng mga lesbian ay naibibigay na naranasan niya. Kasi nga ang akala ng mga tao, lesbian nga boyish, short hair, maikli yung buhok, tapos ano talaga yung kilos. So yung ganoon ba lang, no? Simple, stereotyping. Perceived soji. Ang akala, ikaw ay lesbian, naranasan mo rin yung diskriminasyon na yun. Okay. Now, ito naman yung pag-aaral ng human rights in 2017. So, 3 years ago. And I quote, no, LGBT students too often find that their schooling experience is marred by bullying, discrimination, lack of access to LGBT-related information, and in some cases, physical or sexual assault. Baka magandang ikalat o kalapin yung mga dokumento at gumawa ka siguro ng pag-aaral, thesis, or dissertation. Ano yung mga karanasan na yun? Kasi itong sa HRW 2017, di naman tayo sakupin syempre yung buong Pilipinas. Baka halimbawa sa area ninyo, Region 1, Region 2, ano yung Region 3, ano yung mga karanasan, tapos pagsama-samahin, maganda siyang paksa ng isang saliksik. Tingnan naman natin yung DepEd Order Number 40, Series of 2012 on Child Protection Policy. Balikan natin si DepEd. Ano yung sinasabi niya? For your awareness, this is the first time in which SOGI was included in an order. Particularly yung letter J of the policy. Sa mga teachers dito sa ating Basic Education Department or Basic Education sector, sabi niya, no, these are the policies and guidelines on protecting children on school from abuse, violence, exploitation, discrimination, bullying, and other forms of abuse defined discrimination against children as an act of exclusion, distinction, restriction, or preference which is based on any grounds such as age, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, language, etc., etc. Yan po ang kauna-unahang dokumento ng Department of Education kung saan pinasok yung salitang sexual orientation and gender identity. Wala pa nga yung expressions sa SOGI. So maganda naman na mayroon ito. Ang susunod na tanong, ito ba ay naisasagawa o naisasabuhay? Yun yung magandang, yung susunod na katanungan. In my dissertation, this is one of the findings. So the prejudice against LGBT people can be verified by the lack of intelligent discussions inside the classroom, where these biases may be broken down to their smallest fragments. Rather, there's no formal introduction of any type in the curriculum that would enable learners respond to questions related to LGBTs. The written curriculum did not necessarily reflect in the actual implementation. Kung sinasabi natin, meron kang DepEd order, pero nasa curriculum ba ng mga pre-service teachers? Kasi kung nasa curriculum ng pre-service teachers, yung mga magiging guro, maaaring maipasa nila yung teknolohiya o kaalaman sa kanilang mga susunod na mga estudyante. Okay. Now, let's relate it to the pandemic. Kamakailan, no? Sa panahon ng pandemya, naranasan ito ng ating mga kapatid ng mga LGBTQ, kung saan, ito yung mula sa Rappler, screenshots of videos showing humiliation of LGBT people amid coronavirus curfew in Pandakaki, Pampanga. This was taken last April 5, 2020. So parang may pagtatangi in yung distinction, no? Kapag bakla, o sige sayaw ka, o sige kanta ka, o mag-push up ka. Yung papagawa sa'yo dahil nga ginagamit mo yung kapangyarihan mo para pahiyain yung kapwa mo. Saan nanggagaling yung ganoong yung ganoong pagkilos o konsepto? Now, let's look at the UNHR report. And this was released in April 2020. Stigmatization, discrimination, hate speech, and attacks on the LGBTI community. The United Nations Human Rights Report, no? They are blamed for disasters. Kaya naman kasi pumutok yung bulkan. Kasi mga bakla na yan eh. Mga ganun, no? Both man-made and natural in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even in South Korea, may ganoon silang paniniwala. Increase in homophobic and transphobic rhetoric. Maaari din ang kadahilanan nito ay nasa online, nasa social media tayong lahat. Marami tayong panahon, lalo nang hindi pa nagsisimula yung klase. So lahat, komentuhan natin. Tapos yung mga, of course, yung mga may negative, mga homo-negative, may mga negatibong pagtrato sa mga LGBTQs, chance nila to para makapagsabi ng kanilang mga hindi magandang opinion laban sa mga LGBT. Pangatlong bullet ay yung reports of police using COVID-19 directives to attack and target LGBTI organizations. So nakita niyo naman kanina yung sample na sinabi ko sa Pandakaki province, kawangis na halimbawa, ito naman kung palagi kayo nasa social media, ito yung hashtag Free Pride 20, kung saan mayroong 20 mga nagpoprotesta ang hinuli. Hindi lang naman yung paghuli yung ating issue. Sabi nung, puntahan ko, mag-forward ako, ito. Siya isang trans woman, so sabi niya, no, so when the police designated our quarters, I experienced discrimination from the police officers who teased me about joining the other girls. They said outright that I am a male. I should be with the men. Those kinds of comments and questions. So, maaaring mas mapapalalim natin yung ating pag-unawa doon sa sinasabi noong nagpoprotesta na yon kung sa mismong sektor ng edukasyon ay nalinaw na ito nung bata pa tayo. No? Of course, we are proposing for an age-appropriate curriculum. Hindi naman grade 1 pa lang, sige, introduce mo yung concept. Ano yan, no? From simple to complex, spiral progression. Access to basic services. We have heard stories of stigma and discrimination while seeking health services, leading to disparities in access, quality, and availability of healthcare. LGBTQ people may not access healthcare services for fear of arrest or violence. Bigyan ko lang kayo ng siguro magandang halimbawa kung saan kapag sa panahon ng mga delubyo, mga kaguluhan, mayroon tayong mga natural and man-made disasters, ang gagawin ng pamahalaan ay magbibilang ilan namang apektadong mga pamilya. Kapag ikaw ay babae at meron kayong anak, hindi kayo kinokonsiderang pamilya sa konsepto o sa definisyon ng pamahalaan, kaya yung access mo doon sa basic services ay wala rin. Okay? Magandang mapag-isipan natin kung doon ba sa definisyon ng mga household na mabibigyan noong ayuda o ng tulong, baka naman pwede nating isama o bakit natin i-restrict yung pagbigay ng ayuda given na yung pamilya na yon ay nangangailangan at sila ay talagang mga naapektuhan nung kung anumang naranasan nilang disaster. Fortunately, hindi kasi ganoon lahat mag-isip. At balikan ko nga, kung meron kang sektor kung saan ipaliliwanag at lilinawin itong mga posisyon na ito, baka hindi na issue yung pagiging LGBTQ mo. Ang iisipin ay nangangailangan kang tulong, therefore, dapat kang bigyan. Sana ganoon, ano? Sige, moving forward, meron naman mga good news, no? Kamakailan, noong July, yung good yung mga, siyempre babalansa hindi natin yung ating presentasyon kung saan, kung may mga negatibong mga karanasan ngayong panahon ng pandemya, may mga positibo naman yan. Dagdag ko pa na, halimbawa yung De La Salle College of St. Benil, meron din silang organisasyon o lipo ng mga LGBT students. So, palakpak para sa De La Salle University bilang isang katolikong institusyon. Okay, ito naman isa pang good. Doon naman sa may Pasig, makikita ninyo, no? Yung huling bullet, kung nakikita, sabi niya, yung Pasig Supplemental Social Amelioration Program for LGBTQ na partners na may anak. LGBTQ na nagsasama kung mayroong anak na ang apelyido ay sumusunod sa isa sa nagsasamang LGBTQ, ito ay kinikilalang pamilya. So may progress kasi kung gano'n yung pag-unawa mo, unfortunately sa Pasig ito, no? Paano naman sa iba? Dapat sana buong bayan kasi buong Pilipinas naman yung apekto ng pandemya, hindi lang naman Pasig. But this is a good thing that had happened during the time of the pandemic. Okay. Sige, next. So, we are being asked to level up, no? Banks in 2001, sa siyang curricularists, claimed that an effective, transformative, and empowered curriculum must be implemented by teachers who have the knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed to help students understand the ways in which knowledge is constructed and used to support power group relations. That means to say, we really have to do something about the curriculum of the teachers or the curriculum of the pre-service teachers. Kasi sila yung magiging daluyan o magiging medium para matamo mo yung sinasabi mong yung sinasabi mong outcomes ng curriculum mo. Kung gusto mo ng iyong mga estudyante ay maging if you are wanting your students to be empowered, then you have to empower your teachers too. They can only level up if the teachers, if the curriculum, everyone participating in the education sector or part of the involved in the education sector will fully participate. Okay, next. Pakita ko yung mga cases of bullying and discriminations inside the school on the basis of SOGI. No? Kuha ito sa University of the East, kung saan last year nagkaroon kami ng first Pride March sa mga, siyempre, lipunan ng mga estudyante, mga kaguruan. So, kapag halimbawa mayroong mga advocate sa loob ng mga eskwelahan, hindi mo kailangan na magkaroon ng batas na ay, kailangan ipasa natin muna yung batas para tayo makapag-Pride March. Hindi. Kasi kung yung pinaniniwalaan mo ay nakaangkla doon sa prinsipyo ng karapatang pantao, magagawa mo naman yon. At syempre, sa suporta ng mga ng administrasyon. Various forms of discrimination against them are recorded, including ridicule and bias-related physical assaults, impeding students' educational performance, emotional development, and participation in school-related programs. Share ko lang itong particular na pag-aaral na to nila Beers, cited in Saludin 2011. Pinakita na yung forma ng yung mga diskriminasyon na nararanasan ay may iba't ibang anyo. Okay? At dahil doon, tignan natin yung epekto. Alam mo na yung sanhi. Ano naman yung naging bunga? Yung bata, kahit gusto niyang makilahok o mag-participate sa kung anumang diskusyon, hindi niya magawa. Dahil, nandoon nga yung fear of physical assault, fear of being ridiculed, fear of bias. And what if yung mismong bias ay manggagaling sa guro? Okay. Next. Okay, ano sabi sa pag-aaral na yun? In cases like this, it was found that a very few teachers intervene, making it harder for the victims to assert themselves in the situation. So, maintindihan niyo sa Elsa, bakit kailangan niyang i-conceal? Bakit niya kailangan itago? Dahil nga, kahit si mismo guro, hindi kayo naman tutulungan. Lalo na kung yung teachers bring their biases and prejudices in the classroom. So that is why we are advocating for the inclusion of these discussions in the pre-service teachers curriculum. May pasok siya para alam din ng guro paano siya magre-react. Ano yung dapat na naging reaction niya? Ano yung inaasahang reaction niya ayon sa mga prinsipyo ng karapatang pantao. Okay, bagit ko na yan, no? This resulted in the attempt of many LGBT to hide their sexual orientation. So, tinatago nila. Sa college students and faculty naman, na nagpapakita na sila ay LGBTQ. Kaya, di ba yung mga reaction natin, yan, lesbian yung teacher na yan, no? Pag usapan ka talaga, no? And in the study of Koshio, sabi nga, no, they're more likely to fear for their physical safety based on their SOGI. Safety in terms of yung safety hindi lang naman physical, no? Pati yung mental safety, yung gusto mo bang pumasok sa eskwelahan o sa sa isang sektor o trabaho, kung hindi natin sa eskwelahan na sa araw-araw ng ginawa ng Diyos ay napaka-toxic. Okay, bullying and suicide. The LGBT community is considered vulnerable to bullying and homophobia. In fact, in some African countries, meron tayong 7 bansa sa buong mundo kung saan kapag ikaw ay LGBT o miyembro ng LGBTQ community, it's criminalized, you'll be criminalized and it's punishable by death. So huwag tayong pumunta sa mga bansa na iyon. Ganun din, no? Mamayan ka ng bansa na yon, yung thoughts, yung suicide ideation mo, sobrang taas. Ngayon sa pag-aaral ng Trevor Project, makikita nyo dito sa susunod na slide, yung thoughts of suicide ay 40% na last year. Now, given the pandemic, isolation, pinakita ko sa kaninang slide, sa tingin nyo, tumaas kaya yung suicide ideation? And the answer is yes. Ang taas ng depression ng mga tao dahil sa pandemya. Mas mataas ang depression kapag ikaw ay nasa pandemya na nga, tapos doon ka pa sa toxic environment, whether nasa bahay ka o pumapasok ka dahil yung work arrangement mo ay papasok ka at makikita mo pa rin yung mga kasamahan mo na ganoon ang trato sa iyo, pero wala kang choice dahil economic livelihood, ang daming nawalan ng trabaho eh. Ang taas nung depression, ang taas nung pag-isay, baka mas magandang mawala na lang ako kasi yung karanasan na to ay hindi ko na kinakaya. Now let's look at the context of the Philippines. In our country, labeling is more prevalent in forms of teasing, sarcastic comments, and berating those who belong to the LGBT community or perceived member. Joke lang yun, pero malaman yung joke na yun. Ay, ang pogi mo naman, sayang ka naman. Bakit ka bakla? Diba yung mga ganang mga comments? Pero ano yun, malaki yung malaki yung sinasabi noon. Kasi ang ibig kong sabihin, kung bakit siya na bakla, okay lang. Kasi pogi yung sayang eh. Yung mga quick comments natin na, yun nga, ang akala natin ay nakakatawa. Pero malalim yun. Or, bakit ka naman lesbiana? Sayang yung jeans mo, dapat manganak ka. Bakit yung lesbian hindi pwedeng manganak? Yun yung kanyang sexual orientation. Hindi ibig sabihin ay wala siyang kakayahang magbuntis. So, linawin natin yung mga ganoong mga ganoong pananalita. Sige. Kanina, nabanggit yung self-actualization mo. So, relate ko lang si Maslow. Maslow first before we can bloom. Ginamit ko na itong particular na slide na to sa isa kong talk. No? So, kung ang safety and security sa mga nagtuturo ng understanding the self o sa mga naging estudyante ay safety and security, di ba? Physiological, safety and security. Kung naniniwala kayo sa teorya ni Maslow, belongingness, esteem, self-actualization. Paano ka, yung Bloom ay taxonomy of educational objectives. Paano mo matatampo yung mga gusto mong ituro o dapat na matutunan, paano ituturo ng mga bata, kung ikaw mismo, yung safety and security mo ay hindi mo ma-secure o hindi mo mapunan o matugunan. Okay? Nasabi ko na yan, no? Not necessarily reflect. However, I just would like to share with you, lalo na yung huling, yung written curriculum. Sa ating K-12 curriculum, meron naman, hindi naman siya walang-wala talaga. So first quarter, nung review sa aking dissertation, kasi review ko yung K-12 curriculum, first quarter ng grade 8, i-introduce yung concept ng sex, sexuality, and gender. Doon naman sa grade 10, araling panlipunan, i-introduce yung concept ng transgender. So kung ito ay spiral progression, paano mo na-discuss si transgender sa araling panlipunan nang wala ka pa doon sa pangunahing mga konsepto? Meron ba tayong assumption na alam na nila? Okay. So values education naman, grade 8. So fourth quarter, napasok na rin yung konsepto. So ang sinasabi natin ay, pag pinasok mo yung konsepto, yun bang mga matuturo, are they equipped with the necessary competence and skills to teach the concepts given they are not products of the K-12 curriculum. So baka kailangan tingnan yung curriculum ng pre-service teachers to ensure that whatever they will be teaching will be faithful or compliant doon sa curriculum. Okay, so let me share with you some findings. Huwag kayo mag-ela, malapit na akong matapos. These experiences are perpetrated not just by their classmates, but also by their teachers and administrators in school. Magandang tingnan natin ito, no? Meron kaming karanasan sa isang eskwelahan, kung nababanggitin, no? Yung bata ay transgender. So sabi doon sa kanya nung opisyal ng eskwelahan, ba't ka ba ganyan? So napahiyain ba? Ba't ka ba ganyan itsura mo? Maupo kang, bayo ka nga, nakatayo. Maupo ka nga dyan. Pinapulang siya doon matagal na panahon. Ano to ha? Yung eskwelahan ay hindi Catholic school, pero yung bata, umiiyak siya. Bakit niya ako pinapagalitan? Hindi niya maintindihan yung pinanggagalingan. Para ang sinasabi lang sa kanya, bakit ka ganyan? Ba't ganyan ang itsura mo? Ano gusto mong palabasin? Okay? So kung ganoon yung environment na meron yung mga bata, at ganun yung environment na meron halimbawa si teacher, pag-uusapan siya ng kanyang mga kapwa guro, na dapat nga ay daluyan nung karunungan, ay problema talaga yung ating yung ating lipunan. The biases and prejudices they experience are largely caused by the society's belief that it is unnatural and immoral. Muli, balikan natin yung philosophic discourse. What is homosexuality? Although nasagot mo na siya paulit-ulit, hindi nga siya tumitibo sa isip ng mga tao dahil wala nang formal introduction. Next, in relation to that previous slide, there is the assumption that the teachers implementing the curriculum have the proper knowledge on these issues prior to its implementation. For some reason, this seems to be problematic. Being LGBT requires one to behave properly or accordingly to be respected. Ang taas ng pamantayan mo kapag ikaw ay nasa LGBTQ kasi nga, isip na dapat magano ka, dapat mag-perform ka, dapat ganito ka, dapat para naglalaho yung pagiging LGBTQ mo doon sa sistemang naroroon ka. Okay? So for our conclusion, the issue calls for a more comprehensive review of the curricular framework that genuinely addresses the issue of discrimination and inequality because of one's SOGI. Policies and regulations may influence current practices, and this will commence once the education sector addresses the issue. There are efforts. For instance, in the tertiary level, in 2015, nag-release ang CHED, Guidelines and Policies doon sa inclusion ng gender and development sa ating sa sektor sa CHED kasi meron na si DepEd, meron si CHED. Ang ulitin natin, ang susunod ay paano natin ito mapagtatagumpayan, paano natin ito mapapalawig, paano natin how are we going to ensure that those who will be implementing it possess the skills and competence that are faithful. Language, inclusivity and language. Sabi ni Perrin Waldvis and Lindblom in 2015, inclusivity in language used inside the classroom promotes understanding and acknowledgement of identities and orientations present among learners. They opined that providing information on homosexuality would make the issue less of a taboo and may lead to a more open dialogue in the society. So pag-usapan natin, hindi kasi pwedeng, wala yan, maglalaho rin yan. Kasi whether you like it or not, hindi siya mawawala. Yung example na ginagamit ng kaibigan ko palagi, para siya pagiging left-handed. Kung ang bias mo ay pagiging right-handed, hindi mo alam kung bakit may left-handed, but it just exists in the same breath. Yung heterosexuality at homosexuality, even bisexuality, ang mga SOGI, kasi lahat naman tayo ay may SOGI. Yun yung variance ng sexual identities. And we have to recognize that hindi naman babae at lalaki. Hindi lang, may intersex nga eh. So yung concept pa ng intersex, hindi pa na-introduce yung mga characteristics. Okay? And we also need to recognize the importance of such identities as advocated by Powell and Folia. Kasi kapag hindi, if the curriculum continues to neglect the existence of LGBTQs will always be tagged as others and will be trivialized. So I think it's high time for us to look at the curriculum, saan natin pwedeng pag-usapan, magkaroon ng open dialogue. Like ko sinasabi, no, yung homosexuality is not something that you encourage nor discourage. It's something that we should talk about. Pag-usapan natin ito. Kasi maraming mga a lot of people are suffering because of the discrimination they experience on the basis of their soji. So, gamitin ko lang yung kay Jordan. Sabi ni Jordan in 2007, regular schools with this inclusive education orientation will be the most effective tools in addressing discriminatory attitudes, thus creating welcoming communities, building an inclusive society, and achieving education for all. That's according to Jordan in 2007. Yun naman talaga yon. Kung talagang gusto nating maglikha at gusto nating maging faithful sinasabi natin inclusive education, lahat kasama. Hindi lahat ng mga sa termino nga na ginagamit na naging sikat kamakailan, no, parang mga taon, lahat naman nasa laylayan ng lipunan, pag-usapan natin, bigyan natin sila ng puwang doon sa sektor ng edukasyon. Finally, binanggit kayo na yung multicultural education ng ating first speaker. According to Salud in 2011, multicultural education seeks to help teachers acknowledge and understand the increasing diversity in society and in the classrooms and to see their students' background as assets that can support student learning and the learning of others. Maybe it's time for change, and maybe it's also time for us to recognize that students are not just learning from us, we're also learning from them. So ito na yung last slide. Hindi siya yung last slide, pero yung last Jordan wrote in 2007, the pragmatic reason for adopting instruction is that it is a required educational policy. Ang Pilipinas ay signatory sa lahat, sa maraming human rights instruments. Bagitin ko isa-isa, no? Meron tayong CEDAW, meron tayong Beijing Platform, meron tayong, of course, the Magna Carta of Women, kaya nagkaroon ng 5% budget ang GAD, alam to ng mga nasa pampublikong sektor. Meron kang DepEd Child Protection Policy, meron kang CHED Order number 1 series of 2015. So, ano pa bang kailangan? Siguro yung kulang lang yung anti-discrimination law, kung saan mas mapoprotektahan yung sektor sa anumang mga karahasan, pang-aabuso at diskriminasyon na naranasan base sa kanilang soji. The more philosophical reasons include the universally accepted view that all students, everyone, have a right to learn in a regular classroom. That's according to Jordan in 2007. So these are the references. If you have questions na hindi masagot ngayon sa ating open forum, you can contact me at eva.calueng@ue.edu.ph. At maraming salamat sa inyong pakikinig. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eva.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. First of all, I would like to thank the Philosophical Association of the Philippines for inviting me to be the reactor to this webinar on gender education in the pandemic. These three concepts are very much relevant in these challenging times, and I believe that our two speakers have presented interesting points for discourse to deepen our understanding on these issues. Nais kong tahiin yung aking reaksyon sa dalawang presentasyon sa pagdalumat sa konsepto ng edukasyon. Mahalaga ang edukasyon, alam na natin ito. Paulit-ulit nating naririnig yung kasabihan na ang edukasyon ang susi sa tagumpay, na ito ang isa sa mga paraan para sa panlipunang mobilidad or social mobility, na ito ang nagbibigay ng pag-asa para makaahon sa kahirapan ang mga mamamayan. Pag tinignan natin yung etimolohiya ng salitang paaralan at pamantasan, maaari nating balikan yung kanilang mga salitang ugat. No? Ang paaralan ay aral. Ibig sabihin, ang paaralan ay isang espasyo na nagluluwal ng mga taong aral, mga taong may kaalaman at kasanayan, edukado, sabi nga nila. Samantala, ang salitang pamantasan naman ay mula sa salitang ugat nito na pantas. Ngayon, ang pamantasan ay isang espasyo na nagluluwal naman ng mga pantas, no? May mga taong paham, marunong, o dalubhasa, no? Ng mga intelektual. Sa pagsusuri ng lipunang Pilipino, malaki ang papel na ginagampanan ng mga taong nabibilang sa uring intelektual. Sa usapin ng produksyon, ang uring intelektual yung nangunguna sa produksyon ng mga kaalaman, ng mga karunungan. Kung ang mga magsasaka at ibang nabibilang sa uri ng mga pasante ay siyang lumilikha ng mga hilaw na materyales sa produksyon, ang mga manggagawa naman or the proletariat ang nagpoproseso ng mga ito at lumilikha ng mga produkto, tayong nabibilang sa uring intellectual or the intellectual class ang lumilikha ng mga kaalaman para dito. Ang ating kapital ay ang ating karunungan, ang ating diploma, o yung mga natutunan natin sa mga paaralan at pamantasan. It is also imperative for us to be critical about the role of education in the society, its potentials and power. Louis Althusser argued that the ruling class maintains its power through ideological state apparatuses, or the ISAs. ISAs are institutions that spread ideology to ensure that the proletariat is in a state of false consciousness. The church, the media, and the education institution are some of the ISAs that Althusser was talking about. These institutions, the media, church, and school, teach people the norms and values of the society. What is okay and not okay, what is right and what is wrong, what is moral and immoral. We may not be aware of it, but these institutions shape the way we think to the point of these institutions imposing these ideas, these thoughts to us. That is hegemony, no? O sa Filipino, ginagaho tayo ng mga institusyong ito to serve the interest of the ruling class. Halimbawa, napapanood natin sa telebisyon o social media ang mga balita tungkol sa mga bata na umaakyat pa ng bundok para makakuha ng signal para sa kanilang online class. O kaya may mga balita tungkol sa tatay na nagpupun ng barya para makabili ng cellphone na magagamit ng kanyang anak para sa pasukan na darating. O mga teacher na sa highway gumagawa ng ilang mga module at may mga sariling ginagawang fundraising drive para sa supply ng mga bond paper at ink sa eskwelahan. Ano ang karaniwang takeaway sa mga balitang ito? So, ang takeaway yan, wow, nakakabilib naman sila. No? Ganyan dapat maging madiskarte. No? Kaya kahanga-hanga ang kagustuhan nilang matuto at magturo. No? Yan dapat ang tularan. Pero yung tanong natin, ano ang hindi sinasabi ng mga palabas o ng mga balitang ito? Sa halip na questionin yung mabagal na serbisyo ng internet at kung ano ba ang ginagawa ng mga telecommunications company o ng mga ahensya ng gobyerno sa problemang ito, o kaya iliit na dapat ang DepEd tiyakin ang kaligtasan at kahandaan ng mga estudyante at guro sa online class, o kaya yung bibigay diin na ang serbisyo ng edukasyon at internet ay mga karapatan na dapat ibinibigay sa mga mamayan. Nauuwi yung mga balita sa media na ang itinatampo ay yung kanya-kanyang diskarte ng mga mag-aaral, magulang hamon sa edukasyon sa panahon ito, na kung may problema ka, tumiskate ka. Sa ganitong paraan tayo ginagahon ng media bilang isang institusyon. Siyempre, hindi ko na kinakailangan pang palawigin ko siguro yung pagtalakay sa kung paano tayo ginagahon ng simbahan. Sa mga Pilipino, marami sa mga pinaniniwalaan natin na tama at mali, o mabuti at masama, o moral at immoral, ito ay itinuturo sa atin simbahan. No? Ang mga turong ito hindi lamang sa simbahan makapangyarihan, no? Kasi sa halimbawa sa Kongreso, ang simbahan ang isa sa mga pangunahing tumututol sa pagpasa ng mga batas na may kinalaman sa sexualidad at kasarian. Halimbawa, yung divorce, no? Kaya yung pagbibigay ng karapatan na maging mag-asawa ang dalawang parehong kasarian. Kasi nga sinasabi ng simbahan na mga ito yung mali, na ito yung taliwas sa mga turo ng relihiyon. No? So, ganito tayo ginagawa ng simbahan. Muli, nais kong bigyang diin yung panggagahon naman ng mga institusyong pang-edukasyon sa ating mga Pilipino batay doon sa presentasyon na ginawa ng ating dalawang tagapagsalita ngayong umaga. In Mr. Jonathan Florendo's talk entitled Oppression and Philippine OBE, he argues that the outcomes-based education framework that is being implemented in higher learning institutions in the country is a brainchild of capitalism, that this primarily aims to develop skills that are necessary to propel the capitalist economy and intend to produce quality graduates required with the global economic order. I may have reservations to one or two points that he raised with regards to OBE, but I couldn't agree more with his presentation that policies and agenda of the Philippine education system, such as the OBE, are problematic. And as he said, in Bushian perspective, this educational system becomes oppressive and repressive. At one point, he also said that the corporatization of OBE-grounded Philippine universities used closely to the characteristics of a neoliberal university. Neoliberalism and its policy agendas have infected learning institutions around the world, especially in third world economies like the Philippines. In Baltonado's study, he says that academic capitalism has already entered into the classroom and it has redefined economic premises upon which the entire higher education system was instituted. Ang implementasyon ng OBE ayon rin kay Ginong Florendo ay nagsisilbing pika ng opresyon at represyon. Naging instrumento ito ng panunupil sa kalayaan ng mga guro at mag-aaral at lumilikha ng mga paaralan at pamantasan. Ang tanging layunin ay magluwal ng mga mamamayang matutugon sa hinihinging kasanayan ng mga kumpanya, partikular mga global na kumpanya, no, na ang tingin sa mga bansang tulad ng Pilipinas ay ahensyang pwedeng pagkunan ng murang paggawa para tayong manpower agency. Hindi ito nalalayo sa sinasabi ng makabayang kritiko na si Renato Constantino sa kanyang artikulong The Miseducation of the Philippine People, na bagamat matagal na niya itong isinulat ay nananatiling mahalaga ito sa pag-unawa sa sistema ng edukasyon sa bansa. Binabanggit niya dito yung katangian ng sistema ng edukasyon sa Pilipinas. Binigay siya tatlong katangian na ay kolonyal, commercial, at elitista. Kolonyal dahil ang mga paaralan di umano sa Pilipinas mula sa curriculum nito, yung paraan ng pagtuturo, mga kursong ginagamit, mga materials na ginagamit, ang ginagamit at layunin ay nakakiling, may bias sa pagtugon sa kahingian at pangangailangan ng mga dayuhang bansa at dayuhang kumpanya na binabanggit din ni Florendo sa kanyang presentasyon. Komersyalisado naman dahil ang mga paaralan at pamantasan sa Pilipinas ay itinuturing na isang negosyo. Kung gayon, sa halip na ang pangunahing layunin ng mga pamantasan ay magturo at lumikha ng karunungan, dahil itinuturing itong isang negosyo, ang naging pangunahing tuloy ay ang kumita. No? Pinatatakbo ito bilang mga korporasyon na kung titignan kaugnay sa implementasyon ng OBE ay ni Florendo, nakatuon lang sa results, sa resulta. Sa huli, yung sistema ng edukasyon sa bansa ay elitista, sabi ni Constantino, dahil ang access dito ay limitado lamang sa ilan. O mas ako sigurong sabihin na yung access sa dekalidad na edukasyon ay para lamang sa ilan, no? say ilang may kakayahang magbayad sa mga pamantasang may mataas na presyo o talaga. Dahil sa Pilipinas, hindi maitatanggi na yung mga pamantasan na itinuturing na may dekalidad na edukasyon ay karaniwan o madalas ay may mataas ding tuition.
Excuse me, Sir Rowie.
So, ang yung tanong, paano tayo
Sir Rowie, excuse
Yes.
lang. Medyo malabo lang yung mic mo.
Subukan ko lumapit.
Okay. Medyo malabo lang. Thank you.
So, yung tanong, paano tayo ginagahom ng edukasyon? No? O siguro, kaugnay nung talk ni Ginoong Florendo, paano tayo ginagahom ng OBE? Paniniwala tayo ng OBE na higit sa proseso at esensya ng pagkatuto, ang mahalaga ay ang resulta. Ang mahalaga ay anong kasanayan ang natutunan mo na magagamit mo sa iyong pagkatrabaho. Natuto ka bang gumawa ng mga plano sa pagtayo ng gusali, o pagbabalanse ng mga financial statement, o pag-direct ng mga video, o natuto ka bang mag-welding, o mag-ayos ng kama at maglinis ng mga kubeta. In Dr. Eva Kaluwing's presentation entitled LGBT Inclusive Education during COVID-19, she tackled a very interesting issue in education, which is the inclusion of the LGBT discourse in education. She believes that the experiences of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgenders should be well documented, especially during the pandemic. So this will be considered in forming philosophical frameworks in education. The Philippines may be known as one of the most gender-friendly countries in the world, but this doesn't mean that Filipino LGBTs are the most free, because every day, as Dr. Kaluwing said, many LGBT members experience different forms of abuse and discrimination. And it's also interesting that Dr. Kaluwing points out that even during the pandemic, when most Filipinos are supposed to stay home, LGBT's vulnerability and marginalization have become more apparent, as documented by the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Sa simula ng aking reaksyon, binigyang diin ko yung papel at kapangyarihan ng edukasyon sa paghubog ng ating kaisipan, ng ating mga konsepto at paniniwala. Maraming kabataan ang iginugugol ang malaking bahagi ng kanilang panahon mula pagkabata hanggang sa kanilang pagdadalaga at pagbibinata sa loob ng mga paaralan, kapiling ang kanilang kapwa, bata at kabataan. Sa paaralan natin natututunan yung pakikitungo sa ibang tao bukod sa ating pamilya at mga kaibigan. Binubuo natin ang ating konsepto ng pagiging babae at lalaki mula sa mga karanasan sa paaralan at maging sa mga leksyong itinuturo sa klase. May kapangyarihan ang paaralang itakda sa atin ang kanilang konsepto ng kasarian at seksualidad. Sa paaralan unang nabubuo ang pagkakaiba ng babae at lalaki. Sa paaralan din na ipapamalay sa mga mag-aaral, halimbawa sa mga simpleng gawain tulad ng pagpapapila kapag flag ceremony, inihiwalay ang sa usapin ng uniform kapag babae nakabalda, kapag lalaki naka-shorts o pantalon. Nagiging malay ang mga mag-aaral ukol sa mga modelo o hulmahan ng kasarian mula sa mga maaaring gamiting mga teksto at materyales panturo ng kanilang guro. Ang mga maikling kwento, tula o anumang teksto na ginagamit ng guro ay lagit-laging pinagmumula ng kaalaman ukol sa kasarian ng mga mag-aaral. At mula rito, nakabubuo sila ng kanilang sariling konsepto ng kasarian. Kasama na ang pagtatangi ukol sa mga pagkakaiba ng mga kasarian. Ngunit kung mapapansin, karaniwan na ang kasariang babae at lalaki lamang ang nabibigyan ng malinaw na kalikasan at katangian sa ating mga paaralan. Walang huwang ang pag-aaral sa pagiging lesbiana, bakla at kasarian sa mga paaralan sa mga nakalipas na dekada. Dahil sa kawalan ng integrasyon at inklusyon ng usapin ng kasariang bakla at lesbiana at iba pang kasarian sa mga paaralan, nakararanas tuloy ang maraming bakla at lesbianang mag-aaral ng diskriminasyon mula sa mga kaklase, minsan maging sa kanilang mga guro at iba pang mga taong bumubuo sa institusyon ng paaralan. Guardian, janitor, principal, o pahiyain ang kanyang mga klase dahil sa kanyang mga kilos na hindi katanggap tanggap sa lipunang kanilang ginaganawan. Sa pag-aaral na isinagawa ni Beckett, nakita niya kung paano ang mga maklang mag-aaral ay malay sa diskriminasyong kanilang nararanasan sa loob ng mga paaralan. No? According to Beckett, because of one's homosexuality, he is also a marginalized boy who knows that being gay does not measure up to the dominant instructions that define what it means to be a normal boy at his school. We must consider gender to be an educational issue and build the key learning areas in order to attend to boys' personal and social development as future workers, citizens, partners, and parents. No? In addition, Giro identified 3 ways in which schools tend to promote inequality and discrimination based on gender. Schools provide different classes and social groups with knowledge and skills they needed to occupy their respective places in a labor force stratified by class, race, and gender. Second, schools were seen as reproductive in the cultural sense, no? Functioning in part to distribute and legitimate forms of knowledge, value, language, and modes of style that constitute the dominant culture and its interest. Third, schools were viewed as part of a state apparatus that produce and legitimate the economic, ideological imperatives that underlies the state political power. Sa lamang kay Dr. Kaluweng, at inclusion no ng usaping LGBT sa edukasyon no na kanilang karanasan partikular sa panahong ito ng pandemya no mga abuso at diskriminasyon kanilang kinakaharap bilang mga miyembro ng LGBT. Binanggit niya rin ito pero na-highlight pa no itampok pa yung sa panahong ito ng mahalagang bahagi ng ating kasaysayan sa panahon ng pandemya, magandang tignan at balik-balikan yung naging pakikibaka ng mga LGBT. No? Sa isinagawang Pride March nung itong Hunyo sa Menjola, kung saan marami sa mga pagkilos ay ginagawa sa UP Diliman dahil yung libre. Pero itong LGBT group na ito, sa Menjola talaga sila nagpunta. No? Sa pangungari ng paghahari, bit-bit nila hindi lamang yung mga isyong pangkasarian, ilang issue ng mga LGBT, kundi yung iba't iba pang mga isyong panlipunan tulad ng pagtutol sa anti-terrorism bill, yung paglaban para sa kalayaan sa pamamahayag, yung pagkapahinto ng jeepney phase-out, at maging yung panawagan para sa mass testing no at mas maayos na serbisyo at plano mula sa pamahalaan sa pagtugon dito sa pandemya. Higit sa lahat, sa aking palagay, pinapakita ng mga miyembro ng LGBT sa panahon ito na sa panahon ng pandemya ay mayroong espasyo ang protesta at pakikibaka. As for my last note, I would like to emphasize what Constantino regards as the supposed qualities of Philippine education, that it should be nationalist, scientific, and mass-oriented. Transformative education entails making critical thinking as a major learning outcome of any educational paradigm. It is in this skill that we make our students and even teachers be catalysts of change in the Philippine society. Yun, no? Muli maraming salamat at pagbati kina Mr. Jonathan Forendo, kay Dr. Eva Kaluweng at sa Philosophical Association of the Philippines. Lamang po at maraming salamat.
Salamat, Karowi, sa iyong magandang reaksyon sa ating mga presentasyon ngayong araw na ito. Ngayon, meron pa naman tayong 10 minuto upang mag-usap-usap tungkol sa mga natutunan natin ngayon. I-open ko lang yung floor for questions. Kung meron kayong tanong, pakilagay na lang po sa chat box. Tapos, ibigay niyo po sa lahat para makita rin ng ating mga speakers. May mga tanong po ba? Balikan ko lang yung ibang tanong kasi maraming tanong kanina na excuse me. So simulan natin dun sa tanong about ano sa OBE for Jonathan Florendo. Ang tanong ay, saan na nga ba yung tanong? Bossing niya. Thank you. Actually, reaction siya from Aldrin Torrejos. Thank you, sir, for sharing another side of OBE. I'm teaching in a state university and these observations of yours are legit. Siguro, pa-komenta na lang to, Jonathan, kasi galing sila sa state university, tapos tingin nila ay maganda raw yung iyong comment about yung OBE. Ano naman yung effect nito kunyari dun sa mga state universities? Lalo na sila yung unang tumatanggap ng mga polisiyang ito. Jonathan?
Anong effect? I think yung OB po ay unang-una, ini-stifle po niya yung freedom para po sa which I believe na yung freedom is very essential in the realization of naging mahirap ngayong parang banggahin yung UBI kasi batas po yung UBI.
Uh-huh.
Pero ang CIs, especially yung mga state universities na ilabi kung ano ang negative na consequence ng UBE sa education. And siguro, isang way sa paglabi is pagsulat ng mga papers about OBE. So, yun po, pwede natin simulan yun na simulan na parang action para itama kung ano po yung nakikita nating medyo kulang sa education po ngayon na umiiral po.
Okay, si Eva. Kay Eva naman, ano kaya ang aral at kaisipan na masasabi ni Fraire sa kalagayan ng edukasyon sa panahon ng pandemya? Ito kaya ay nagpapalaya o mapanupil sa hangaring maaabot ang kalagayang mahubog ang tao tungo sa tunay na adhika ng edukasyon? So ano raw masasabi niyo tungkol doon kay ano masasabi ni Paulo Fraire dito sa usapin na to? Eva?
Sa tingin ko ay hati ang kanyang magiging posisyon kung ito ba ay mapagpalaya at mapanupil. Mapagpalaya sapagkat kahit na hirap ang ating sistema ng edukasyon, pero nandun pa rin tayo sa katotohanan na kailangan nating magpatuloy bilang isang bansa, bilang isang komunidad sa kabila ng hamon. Kaya mapagpalaya siya, mapanupil rin, sapagkat yun nga, yung katotohanan ng mundo na hindi lahat ay magkakaroon ng pangunahing access doon sa mga serbisyo. Kagaya nung nabanggit kaya ng ating reactor, yung internet connectivity na lang. Ngayon, siguro sa ating analysis, kung tatanggalin natin yung internet connectivity bilang isa sa mga elemento na nakaka-apekto sa pagkatuto, ibig sabihin, okay yung internet connectivity. Sa panahon ng pandemya, ito bang ang ating bang forma ng edukasyon ay mapadiin pa rin o mapagpalaya? Magandang mapag-isipan.
Okay, maganda yung punto kanina ni Sir Rowie. Para kasi yung topic niyong dalawa magkatulad kasi may issue ng operasyon Yung kay Jonathan, ang pinag-uusapan niya yung operasyon ng OBE kasi parang meron ng established outcomes Tapos yung sa'yo naman, Eva, parang merong ang tawag dito? Yung operasyon naman, nangyayari doon sa gender level. Pero may pinupunto rin kanina si Sir Rowie about yung kapitalista na idea Hindi kaya ang pulot dulo naman talaga nito, hindi naman yung gender or yung basta educational philosophies kundi yung economic status natin. Sige, open ko lang yung floor na yun para sa inyong dalawa.
Hango, yung tingin ko po, hango talaga sa capitalism. So, ang tingin ko po, yung OBE, bakit kailangan nating sumang-ayon sa kagustuhan ng ekonomiya na pinapatakbo ng kapitalistang sistema, ito po yung nagiging punot dulo ng opresyon sa edukasyon ngayon. Kasi yung paraan ng doon sa pagkabanggit ni Sir kanina, yung nag-react po na nagiging negosyo yung mga ACIs, hindi ko pinupunto po dito yung negosyo na yung ng pera pero maaaring ganun din yung patutunguhan, pero ang pinupunto ko po ay yung pamamalakad po ng mga university nagiging katulad na kasi ng management style ng isang negosyo yung pagpapatakbo sa akademya na tingin ko hindi dapat kasi magkaiba po yung areas po na yung mga yun po.
Ikaw, anong tingin mo naman, Eva?
Iba yung magiging kasagutan ko kasi gusto ko siyang tingnan sa pamamaraan kung saan yung kawalan ng access o yung diskriminasyon ay paanong nagiging hadlang upang magkaroon ng mas mataas na economic opportunities yung ating mga Pilipino, yung mga mamamayan. So, banggitin ko yung pag-aaral na ginawa ni Professor Lee Padgett. Ito ay yung pag-aaral na yun ay kinomisyon ng World Bank, no? Ang title ng kanyang research ay The Economic Cost of Homophobia in India. So pinakita sa pag-aaral na yon na kapag homophobic yung iyong sistema ng edukasyon, ito yung cost. Kasi hindi sila magpapatuloy sa pag-aaral, hindi tataas yung kanilang economic opportunities. Therefore, naapektuhan yung pangkalahatang ekonomiya ng bansa dahil nga yung mga tao ay hindi tumaas yung kanilang economic opportunities dahil nga discriminating. Papasok pa lang sila sa eskwelahan kung saan may connection palagi natin kinoconnect, no? Education and employment. But of course, being philosophy majors, hindi lang naman employment yung ating patutunguhan. Pero sa mundo kung saan tayo ay pinapagalaw ng ang ekonomiya bilang isang pangunahing social institution, may kita mo yung connection kung saan ang diskriminasyon ay nagiging hadlang o balakid para mas tumaas ang kakayahan o kapabilidad ng isang tao maging mas maunlad, magkaroon ng purchasing power, magkaroon ng kakayahan na pagbutihin ang kanyang kalagayang pang-ekonomiko.
Okay, may tanong po tayo sa chat box to Sir Florendo. How should we assess students as an alternative to OBE?
Ang pagkakaintindi ko po dyan sa tanong, sir, humihingi po ng alternative aside from OBE or i-implement pa rin yung OBE nagagamit na ibang assessment tool. Yung pangalawa po ba, sir?
Yung pangalawa, tingin ko dito, sige, ikaw muna. Ang tingin ko kasi dito parang kung tama ka na mali yung OBE, so ano dapat yung alternative natin to OBE?
Doon sa sinusulat ko pong dissertation po, sir, meron po akong 3 major recommendations na inilagay. Yun yung una, yung paglabi po sa Congress na palitan yung OBE na maaring pag-usap-usapan later ng mga eksperto, ng mga philosophers of education kung ano ba talaga yung angkop sa yung tamang pamamaraan para makamit natin kung ano yung tunay na layunin ng edukasyon. Pangalawa, kung mag-OBE, meron yung subversion na medyo pangalawang bigyan pa rin natin ng kahit ito sinasabi ng OBE, baka meron pa rin tayong pagkakataon na isubvert kung minsan yung bigyan ng freedom yung ito nasa parang call na ng teacher, mga iba't ibang mga activities parang within the classroom na lang nangyayari. Pero meron din akong pangatlong suggestion na pwedeng outcomes-based education pa rin yung alternative natin, pero baguhin natin, imbes na from top to bottom, it should be from the bottom to the top. So it will be the students themselves who will determine or identify the outcomes that they will pursue in class. So yun yung nakikita ko na pinaka feasible this time na kung baguhin na rin yung OBE. From top to bottom, gawin natin from bottom to top. Habang tinitignan ng mga eksperto kung ano ba talaga ang magiging magandang i-implement sa education po.
Okay, so sa huling huling salita mula sa ating mga speakers. Sige, simulan natin kay Eva. Huling mga salita tungkol sa philosophy. Ano bang role ng philosophy ngayon sa panahon ng pandemya, especially sa educational philosophy na? Narinig mo ako, Eva?
Medyo nawala yung paulit naman. Salamat.
So, huling salita na lang mula sa ating mga speakers. Ano ang role ng philosophy ngayon, ngayong panahon ng pandemya, especially ngayon nagta-transition na tayo sa new normal. So, anong role ng philosophy? Especially educational philosophy.
Gusto ko yung binanggit mo na transition sa new normal. Kasi iba akala nasa new normal na tayo. Dahil tayo ay lumilikha. Maganda yung bahaging ginagampan ng filosofiya ay gamitin yung salitang English, no? The role of philosophy is to equip students, everyone, the necessary skills and knowledge to create a better normal, everybody is empowered. That I think is the role of philosophy. So mahalaga na yung filosofiya ay hindi lamang isang kaisipan at ito ay may practical na aplikasyon. Kasi kung puro tayo pagteorya, walang praxis o walang implementasyon, nandoon ka lang sa langit, nandoon ka lang sa ideya, wala ka doon sa may kasalukuyan. Kung hindi mo na-relate sa kasalukuyang sitwasyon ng ating bayan, may problema tayo. Yan. Salamat.
Salamat. Ikaw, Mr. Florendo, anong masasabi mo sa role ng philosophy ngayon?
Malaki ang nakita kong role ng philosophy, lalo-lalo na yung philosophy of education ngayong pandemya. Nakita natin yung pagkakaiba-iba ng mga mag-aaral, social divide, digital divide, at ang very interesting sa akin ay mismong mga estudyante ang nagsalita through social media yung pagkakaiba-iba na yun. So, sa usual na ginagawa natin sa pagtuturo noon, sa yung face-to-face classroom setting, na itong pagkakaiba-iba na to ay nakaligtaan natin. Doon alam natin kung minsan, hindi na tinitake for granted natin. So, malaking epekto pala ito sa edukasyon kung i-take for granted natin yung pagkakaiba-iba na to. Na yung OBE, hindi niya ina-address itong pagkakaiba-iba na to kasi meron na pong pre-established, predetermined outcomes prior to the learning activity. So, ito ay nagpapakita na merong kulang sa OBE na dapat pag-aralan po ng mga philosophers or yung mga thinkers of education po. Yun lang po.
Salamat, Jonathan. Teacher Rowie, anong masasabi mo naman sa role ng mga Pilipinong mag-iisip ngayong mga panahon na ito?
Napakalaking hamon talaga ang ibinato sa atin ng COVID-19. Sa palagay ko, hindi lang ito usaping medical, hindi lang ito usaping militar, kundi malaki yung hamon din sa mga scholars, sa atin na nabibilang sa humanities and social sciences to take part doon sa pag-iisip na binabanggit nga ni Dr. Kaluweng, the new normal. No? Kasi yung new normal, very cultural at very social yung usapin na ito. No? Paano tayo mamumuhay sa panahon ito ng pandemya, sa panahon na wala pang bakuna, sa panahon na maraming nawalan ng trabaho, sa panahon na online ang mga klase. No? Usaping social at usaping kultural ito. At sa filosofiya, napakahalaga yung pagmumuni-muni sa karanasan doon sa danas. Kaya para sa akin yung sabay nating bubuuin, no? Yung the new normal, no? Mula doon sa ating karanasan sa ngayon, pagmumuni-muni dito at later on yung pagbubuo ng mga polisiya, ng mga struktura para sa paano nga ba talaga natin tutugunan itong new normal na tinatawag.
Salamat mga magigiting na tagapagsalita ngayong araw na ito. Salamat din sa mga sumali dito sa webinar ng PAP at marami pa kaming susunod na mga aktibidades. Ito si Gina Epiniano, ang aming treasurer, para i-announce pa yung iba pang mga mangyayari sa mga susunod na buwan. Gina?
Thank you very much, Dr. JJ. At maraming salamat din sa ating mga naging speakers sa araw na to, kay Dr. Eva Kaluweng, kay Mr. Jonathan Florendo, and sa ating reactor, kay Dr. Roel Madula. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, insights, and experience on the topic gender education in the pandemic. For some announcements, membership to the organization is still open. So membership requires accomplishment of the Google form. The link is provided in the slide, and payment of the registration fee. So you may visit our Facebook page for the details of these concern. And our second webinar, the third session the third part of our webinar series will be on philosophy of education in the pandemic, still on education. We'd like to invite you to join us on September 11. That's at Friday, 3 p.m., also via Zoom. We'll have Katya Lenehan, a PhD of the Fujian Catholic University, to talk about this topic. So please watch out for the announcement and the details on how to register through our Facebook group or our Facebook page, Philosophical Association of the Philippines Incorporated. That concludes the webinar for today. Thank you very much to all of you, to our speakers, to the PAP board, and to the participants for today's webinar. Until next time, thank you from PAP.